Just to clarify, you took an investor call 6 hours after your dad passing?
Yeah. Total baptism of fire. I had no idea what it would be like. Day one, do you want to get married? Do you want children? How do you want to co-parent? How much savings are you going to put away each month? You know, all of those questions have to happen up front.
On the first date?
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
Actually, those are common reasons co-founders do end up falling out or disagreeing. We're going to be enemies or we're going to join forces. News happened in the Christmas break, died suddenly in a plane crash. So awful tragedy, and very understandably, we lost that funding. So many things can happen between someone saying yes to an investment and money being in the bank. Never take anything as done until it's really done. My dad passed away in the middle of the last funding round. We do just get one life and it is finite, and we're not guaranteed tomorrow. And actually, do we really need to stress about everything?
Welcome to Strategy and Tragedy, the show all about how to scale and fail in business. My name is Stephanie Melodia, and it is my genuine pleasure to interview some incredible entrepreneurs here. They all share their raw and honest journeys to help you avoid making the same mistakes they did and hopefully provide you with your dose of inspiration. Now, just before I welcome my next guest, I want to say a big thank you to you right there, listening at home, on your commute, while you're pottering about, or maybe even at the gym. I know that there are so many other podcasts out there, so it really means the world to me that you're listening in right now. If you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on future episodes. All right, I'm really looking forward to getting into this one. My next guest is Pippa Harman, the co-founder of Renude. Pippa is a formulation chemist turned beauty tech entrepreneur and joins me on Strategy and Tragedy to recount her fascinating story of building Renude, the AI personalisation platform for skincare, which is on a mission to help people feel great in their bare skin. Renude offers personalised routines based on AI image analysis and a B2B plugin solution for skincare retailers and brands to offer trusted, accurate recommendations to their customers. Pip, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
All right, so before Renude, it was actually Skinlist, wasn't it? That was your first venture.
Yes.
All right, so what was Skinlist? Let's rewind the clock.
So Skinlist came from many, many years of friends and family asking for product advice. And really what I was doing with Skinlist is manually creating routines for people that were confused about the skincare space. So it was started as a side hustle when I had another job, working in product development, and sort of grew rather faster than I was expecting, just through organic Instagram and friends referring others. And that was the business, really. It started as a side hustle and ended up, creating nearly 1,000 skincare routines through that business.
Wow. That's a good problem to have, right? Where it's just growing faster than you expected.
Absolutely.
That's so cool. So definitely validating that there was a need for this.
Exactly.
And I love that you mentioned that you did this as a side hustle while you had your day job, right? Was that just kind of a very kind of minimizing the risk, just kind of testing it out while you still had your salary coming in?
Exactly, yeah. So I really thought that this idea needed exploring, but I didn't want to take the full leap and leave my very cushy job that I also loved. Actually had a chat with my boss at the time and said, look, I've got this idea and I'd love to explore it. Is it possible to reduce my hours, not be full-time anymore? And luckily they were super supportive, and that just allowed me to kind of dip my toe in, test the water, as you say, validate that there was a huge market for this. And then I sort of slowly launched a website, started getting customers, and that's when I finally took the plunge and left my job. Okay,
and you mentioning about the lovely job that you enjoyed was actually working for somebody that you massively admired growing up. Who was this woman?
Yes, so the one and only Marcia Kilgore. Kind of a curious story in that she had been my all-time industry idol. So actually from when she first launched Soap and Glory, she was in the Boots magazine. There was an interview with her. I was about 16 at the time. And I thought, wow, this woman's so cool. Like, her job's so interesting. She knows all about these products. And actually, inadvertently, that led me to take the course I did in cosmetic science and then kind of go into the industry. So then when I was looking for a new job, Beauty Pie didn't exist. I spoke to a recruiter and he said, I've got this role. I can't really tell you much about it, but I can just tell you it's a Marcia Kilgore's next venture.
And you're
I
like,
was
I'm in.
in.
Sign me up. Where do I sign?
Yeah.
That is so amazing.
Exactly.
And I think we just have to underscore the importance of representation, right? Like, see her, be her. How much of an inspiration Marcia Kilgore was to you is just fantastic. So super cool. I'm still so like happy for you that you got to go and work for your idol. That's amazing. So you launched Skinlist, which was an amalgamation of like Skin Analyst, is that correct?
Correct,
like
yes, yeah.
And then so you validated that demand, it was growing, but you then decided to go off into Founders Factory and go in search of a co-founder. So before we get into that, what was the reason for it? Why did you feel the need to go onto an accelerator and find a co-founder?
Well, from my perspective, my background's always been in skincare. So there was huge skill gaps that I had. And as I said, there was a huge amount of demand for this type of service, but I was doing everything myself, everything manually. And I was thinking, you know, there's surely an application for technology in this space to be able to scale this type of service to meet the demand, you know, that exists in the market. So I had been tapping into various networks, trying to speak to people in various different skill sets to find the right co-founder, and actually had probably been looking for, I would say 6 months, maybe even a year, when I met Kate, who is obviously my now co-founder. And it was a really serendipitous meet because she was also working on this concept, but from a completely different perspective. Her background is data science, so she really saw this as a data problem. She had firsthand experience through her a friend who'd experienced the skin issue and struggled to find the right support. So she had been looking at this from the technology aspect, but didn't have the subject matter expert, and had been sort of also looking for a co-founder that was from the beauty industry, that understood skincare ingredients and formulation, that had worked in a sort of consumer-facing business, all of these attributes. And I had been looking for someone that understood, you know, AI and technology and how to scale this type of advice. So when we met, it was a bit of a no-brainer to sort of like, we're going to be enemies or we're going to kind of join forces. And very thankfully, we sort of chose the latter.
Such a perfect match.
Yes.
And I wonder whether that's a good litmus test for a good co-founder pairing as well. It's like, are we going to be like the worst of enemies or the most powerful forces if we join together?
Yeah, exactly. And it was a really strange scenario because you're having to make this decision about someone very quickly and you've just met them. And I'm glad we had Founders Factory. So Kate had just been accepted into Founders Factory as a solo founder, but she was looking for a co-founder. I had just left Beauty Pie and we met about 2 weeks after both of those two things had happened. They were really helpful in the kinds of questions we should ask to sort of expedite whether we could work together. It's almost like dating,
yeah.
But saying on day one, do you want to get married? Do you want children? How do you want to co-parent? How much savings are you going to put away each month? You know, all of those questions have to happen up front.
On the first date.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow, so rigorous. Do you remember any specific questions that...
Yeah, so it's things like, how many hours a week do you expect to work? Things that can cause real friction in the end, because if someone's working, you know, 60 hours a week and someone's working 40, you've got a problem. So actually those are things that I think they had identified as being the common reasons co-founders do end up falling out or disagreeing. To kind of set those expectations up front, actually assess whether you are compatible long term was a really interesting exercise to go through. And I think we were both nervous because we wanted to work together, and we were told to write the answers down separately and then discuss.
Oh, like
so there was no room for
like the marriage game. Is that what it's called? Isn't there like American like quiz like TV show where you have to like write? Anyway, and you keep it to see like how well you know your partner.
Okay.
So
yeah,
anyway, so it's
you
inspiration from that as well.
That's it. You don't have time to confer. You have to
exactly
choose separately. Yeah.
And that way you're giving the most honest answer as well, right? Because you're not getting swayed. Super interesting. I'm really fascinated with this co-founder pairing as well, just to stick with this element for a minute, because what I've noticed is a lot of co-founders that I come across, they've either met each other at university, and it tends to be the very first week, like freshers, where those strong bonds are forged. And so you've got just like this deeper sort of connection. So it's kind of like, you know, we're at uni together, we went through freshers together, like build a business together. Or they work together in a different job, you know, and they had the luxury of time and someone else's dime to test out and see actually how do they work together, and that could be for maybe a year or two. So in this instance, this is where I'm really fascinated to hear more about your story here, because it's neither of those. You didn't meet at university, you didn't work together officially, and you've got to expedite that process. So interesting, going back to the questions that Founders Factory asked you, because obviously it's rooted in what they've observed, what hasn't worked for other co-founder pairings. So you said about like number of hours per week that you're willing to work. Do you remember any others at all?
So there was, how long do you expect to be working on this business? Is the outcome you're expecting at the end? Is it IPO, is it exit, what number? Like all of these things that you've not even launched.
Right.
So like, well, it's kind of crazy to be thinking about those things that feel a million miles away. But you have to sort of at least gauge where you're both thinking about those things.
Get that alignment.
Yeah.
And so before even going through that process, you said that you knew it would be a perfect match because of what sounds like kind of the hard skills on paper with Kate, right? She's come from all of that tech background, data science. You were like, that's exactly what I'm missing. She's looking for what you had. Was there anything else, like besides the Founders Factory process, was there anything else that you picked up on about Kate that made you think she'd be a great co-founder?
So we also went on a few social dates, I guess. There was a beauty event that was happening that week. So we hung out a little bit as well and got to know each other quite quickly as individuals. And I think one of the things that stood out to me, I guess, I don't know if this is necessarily a great thing, but we are quite similar in some senses. So we're both quite calm and maybe logical. So for me, in order to have sort of healthy, constructive conversations and debate and agree on things, you need to approach challenges, I guess, in a similar way, I think. Mm-hmm. So, for example, if I was working with someone that was extremely dominating or forceful or, with their opinions, for example, that could end up being problematic. So I felt from her that she would be easy to work with. Yeah. And we shared a sort of similar demeanor, I guess, in terms of being able to work through difficult conversations. Yeah. Which I think is the other thing, right? You need to have the skills. You need to like the person. You're going to spend a lot of time with them. And you need to be able to go through really difficult times with them. You need to be able to disagree and get to a conclusion that you're both happy with. So really it's I just felt she would be a really easy person to work with. Yeah,
fantastic. And I think there is something to be said there for, there's this huge argument, obviously, for diversity, which like is inarguable, like diversity of backgrounds, perspectives, obviously. But I think there is something to be said, like in that magic co-founder pairing of like, there's enough overlap that like we're just aligned enough in terms of those core values, in terms of how we approach things. You're saying about demeanor. I totally get what you mean, like knowing you as well. Like if you had like this hothead that just kind of like barked down the phone at you if there was a problem, then I can imagine how you would respond to that. So that does make sense. So now that we're sat here a few years later, obviously your read of Kate was proved correct because you're still together.
Yeah, happily still married.
Happily married. I know, I was saying before about spending lots of time with your co-founder. It's your work wife or your work husband, isn't it? So is it worth kind of touching on any of those moments of disagreement or when the goings got tough, again, through that lens of like co-founder and how you've resolved conflicts?
It's a great question. And I feel like we have had a fairly easy ride in that sense.
I'm surprised to hear that because I know that you've been through a lot.
I think in terms of the business, not so much, but in terms of our relationship, we haven't really, even got close to falling out. I think when we disagree on a business decision, we are both very open about discussing the options. We use a lot of data. We both try as much as possible to remove ego from the conversation and just get to a stage where we're both happy with the outcome. So in terms of managing differences of opinions, I think we've been able to do that very effectively.
I love that. I'm so happy for you. That's
Thank
awesome.
you.
Yeah, because it's like the Jeff Bezos, the mission is to get to the truth. Like it really does not matter who's right, who's wrong, as you say, leaving ego at the door. We just need to arrive at what's the best decision for the company here. So love that you guys can just kind of outline your thoughts and the data and discuss it properly.
Yeah, exactly. And I think also you don't know. So
yeah.
you're sort of going, which option's better? Well, we can just come to an agreement. We try that one. It doesn't work. We try the other one. Or, it doesn't, nothing's final really in the world of, startups, tech, business, it's always evolving. So really
you can't be right. You can't have too much of an ego, can you?
No, exactly.
Yeah. Quick one. This is future Steph coming to you from beyond. If you're enjoying this episode, then you can probably guess what I want you to do. Please do me one tiny favor that costs you nothing and takes a second of your time. Hit that subscribe button. It really helps to support this show, and I'm really grateful for you listening. Let's get back into it. And just before we move on from the whole co-founder thing as well, just with Founders Factory, why did you choose that accelerator in particular? Because I know there's quite a few at the moment.
Yeah, so Kate was actually already part of it. So that came with the package of co-founding with her.
So you met her separately to Founders Factory. Yes. So how did you guys meet in the first instance then?
So we met at the Google Startup Campus.
Okay.
So it was Charmaine Reed. She was running an event or speaking about building company culture.
Another powerful female entrepreneur to name drop. Yeah, amazing.
Fave. And we both coincidentally had spoken to the same person at the event. So I'd spoken to someone in the networking out beforehand who then ended up sitting next to her. We'd both been talking about what we were working on, and he said, I think, you need to speak to someone that's here. Yeah.
I mean, that's also such a great initial validator, isn't it? That someone else, the stranger, has spoken to you both separately and been like, wait a minute, you two need to meet.
Yeah.
That's so cool. And I think on that as well, I think what's super important is, the subject of networking comes up a lot on this show as well. Was that putting yourself out there, going to events, networking? I feel like that's not your idea of fun. Did you have to push yourself out of your comfort zone to do those things?
Yes. Yeah, totally. And, a lot of the time you think, I just won't go to that one. But then when you realize, how much impact one decision can make on your life.
I mean, you found your co-founder from this one event.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, exactly. And I was just thinking that stranger, I've got no idea who they are.
I was just wondering, actually, who they are.
Yeah, they've sort of changed the course of both our lives.
Right.
But I wouldn't be able to pick them out, I don't
really?
think, in a
Really?
lineup. Yeah.
No way, we need to rack our brains and try and figure out who they are to thank them. If you're listening to this and you're the stranger at the Google for Startups event hosted by Charmaine Reed that connected Pip and Kate, then drop a comment, leave a message, reach out. We want to hear from you. Was that a guy, gal? Do you remember? It was a guy, so it was male. That's as much as we can remember. Anything else? No, anyway, fine. Okay, so there's a guy that connected you two. And I think also just sticking on kind of just if there's any other like introverted entrepreneurs who feel like they have to push themselves out of their comfort zone to go and do those things, what is it that you told yourself in those moments where you'd much rather be sat at home? What got you out the door that introverted entrepreneurs might value listening to on the show right now?
That's a great question. I think you'll always feel better that you went.
It's like exercise, isn't it?
Yeah. I think if you skip it, it's easy in the moment, and then as soon as it's 2 hours later when you could have already been there and come back, you're like, oh, actually, I wish I'd gone. So I think you never know who you're going to meet, and you'll always feel better if you do take the chance and go.
Nice. All right, love that. Get out, go to these events. All right, perfect. So back into the Renude journey then. So obviously in the intro, I mentioned that this is an AI, platform for skincare analysis. We've spoken before separately how much I love your mission as well. This is a huge thing for me. I never ever thought it would be possible to leave the house without wearing foundation. And I would see other girls do it and just be like, how have you got skin that's okay to not cover up? So absolutely love that. The nature of building a tech platform is, of course, you need fundraising to help you build the product. So I know that that's been a painful journey for you as well. Do you want to give us an overview of what that was like?
Yeah, so fundraising is a process, I guess anyone that's been through it contest to how unique it is, shall we say.
Choosing your words carefully. Unique.
Yeah, so we've been through two. So the first was just out of Founders Factory. It was during the pandemic. It was a total baptism of fire.
Wow.
But we had a lot of founders around us. We had, help from the Founders Factory team to kind of guide us through that process.
That's good.
It was really challenging, honestly. I think I had no idea what it would be like. I had no appreciation of the number of conversations that you'd need to have, number of no's that you'd receive, the sort of level of feedback that you needed to kind of digest, and everyone's got an opinion, right? So it's like how you really translate lots of different opinions into, which are the things that truly are things to be focused on versus an individual's take on something.
Right, because everyone's going to have an opinion, aren't they?
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but that...
Sorry, I was just going to say, I'm really sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I was just going to say, I really appreciate you breaking down those specifics of what made the fundraising journey so difficult, because you beat me to it anyway. I was just about to ask you, like, for listeners who haven't gone through that process, and myself included, where like we all hear how hard it is, but actually breaking down, like, these are the reasons why, like, this is what's so hard, is what I'm just synthesizing from what you said there is the volume, like the amount of conversations, the rejection that you have to endure, and then processing the vast amount of feedback that you get as well. And I guess part of that is deciphering what's actually helpful versus just they're fobbing you off, right? And I know that one particular tragedy happened to you that was completely unexpected and unforeseen during the fundraising process on the investor side of things. Do you want to share what happened?
Yeah, so that was our very first fundraise. We had our target met. We were just sort of getting to, there were multiple investors in that syndicate, and one of them, their wife actually died suddenly in a plane crash. So awful tragedy for that person, and very understandably, they did not have the headspace to deal with anything else. And as a result, the whole syndicate, they don't all move. So we lost that amount of funding at the quite late stage. So then involved a plan B of trying to raise the target amount in a very short space of time, which we managed very nearly. So we closed that funding round just after Christmas. Actually, that news happened in the Christmas break.
Wow.
So awful for them, but I think the learning really is that money's not secured until it's in your bank, I would say. And that's one thing I've heard from so many people as well. So many things can happen between someone saying yes to an investment and being signed. So I really would say never take anything as done until it's really done. Yeah,
definitely. I mean, I know that is incredibly rare. I mean, of all the stories and interviews that I've done, this has, thankfully, touch wood, like never come up. And this is a genuine, real tragedy. But I think I love the lesson that you share with that. I think part of that also is, of course, you and Kate are very methodical and super logical in the process. So you probably did have a plan B up your sleeve. You're probably like, this is what we're going to do. But, I don't know if everyone would. I don't know if anyone would have that foresight to say, maybe our investor's wife is going to sadly pass away in a plane crash, right? Anything can happen, anything, not again to induce any unnecessary anxiety with listeners. But I guess I just want to add, in addition to your lesson learned, which don't do anything until the money's actually in the bank, is also have a plan B. So kudos to you for having a plan B and still pulling it out the bag, even with this really sad tragedy happening in the process. So whereabouts in the story? So you secured 2 VC rounds. I saw you recently did crowdfunding as well. What made you decide to switch gears and go down the crowdfunding route?
Yeah, so that was our first round that we just talked about, and then we did our seed round in 2022. So actually we had started speaking with some funds, trying to, I guess, activate a plan B again. We'd spoken to a few of the funds that we were really interested in. We had a few rejections, and we thought, you know what, we've got quite a big community now. We've been going for a few years. Why don't we try a crowdfund? And it was fun. It's a completely different experience. It's a much broader network of investors, generally investing much smaller tickets. We had some angel money that anchored it, as well as an investment from Antler. So that was kind of used to start the initial crowdfund. And then actually we raised quite a lot of money through the crowdfund, and actually then one of the VCs that we'd spoken to previously that was sort of still going through their sort of IC process ended up coming in at the end. So we had a target at the start of the raise. There was a moment where we thought we weren't going to make it, so we went down the crowdfund route, and then actually we ended up getting the VCs sort of coming in towards the end. So we got the total that we were originally raising for.
Congratulations. So
Thank
it was
you.
almost like the other way. So the crowdfunding helped drive momentum to close the deal with the VCs.
I think so.
Kind of.
Yeah, it may have happened either way, but we
Right.
needed to, I guess, take action.
Yeah, exactly. You're not going to sit around.
Yeah.
And congratulations for being part of the Antler portfolio as well.
Thank
That is
you.
super cool. So again, you know, the highs and lows, which again is the purpose of the show, is like you secured the investment, you're part of the Antler portfolio, which is amazing, got on Founders Factory. But then of course there are bumps along in the road. Mentioning bumps in the road, I want to touch on a personal tragedy that happened around a similar sort of time as well, that I know sort of put things into perspective for you. What happened personally with you during this time?
Yeah, so actually this has been something that impacted both fundraisers. So my dad passed away pretty much in the middle of the last funding round. So the crowdfund was going live on the Monday and it happened on the Wednesday prior, so just a few days before. He'd actually been diagnosed just before we started the first crowdfund. He had motor neuron disease, so that set quite a challenging tone, I guess, for both fundraisers. I mean, the first one, just the shell shock of that kind of diagnosis, coupled with the pandemic, coupled with your first fundraise. And I was actually living with him at the time, so that was incredibly challenging, but also really valuable to kind of live with him through some of those periods. And then I guess going into the second fundraise, Kate and I both knew that it was highly likely that he was in his final few months. She actually offered to lead the fundraise for the company because I was just so unsure of the timings of things and how I would feel, which was, amazing of her. But I just, that's one of my roles within the company, and I just didn't want to let her down or the company down. So I, took the fundraise.
Do you think that was the right decision for you to still take that on? Because I know that, like, sometimes we don't want to accept help if it's offered to us, but then you could say that it was maybe a welcome distraction, perhaps, going through something so horrible. Like,
yeah, I think so. And I do think a lot of us have that coping mechanism of busyness, over processing, and I definitely have that also. And it happened just before the crowdfund. I went into hyper survival mode. I think I told you I took an investor call that morning. It had been 6 hours, but I was like, I don't have time to stop and process this.
Crazy.
I need to do what I'm doing, and I can sort of stop and process this later.
Just to clarify, you took an investor call 6 hours after receiving the news of your dad passing.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So I was at home. My stepmom had woken us up at 3 a.m. to kind of let us know. My siblings were both at home as well because we'd known it was sort of days. So we'd all gone back there. So we'd woken up at 3 a.m. I'd spent hours writing this handover, even though I didn't really take much time off. I think I took 2 days off. And then I had this investor call at 9.
And thankfully they invested.
They invested.
They did invest.
Well,
thankfully.
This is strange. So I guess I'm a little bit spiritual, and we were sort of having quite a challenging raise, and the crowdfund hadn't gone live yet. And then we had this one investor call. They ended up investing. We had the Antler IC on the Tuesday, I think, so less than a week later. They ended up investing. The crowdfund went live. We ended up getting a great result. So wow. Part of me is like, felt like we were getting some help from the other side. Yeah. And I think, as you mentioned, obviously we've spoken about this before. There is a sort of halo effect, I guess, for grief. Grief is obviously it's awful. It's, completely personal. But it's all-consuming. It's challenging. It's complex. But there is an element of perspective shifting. You think, we do just get one life and it is finite, and we're not guaranteed tomorrow. And actually, do we really need to stress about everything? You know, so I think I'd gone from feeling, incredibly overwhelmed to actually finding a bit more joy and thinking, you know, we have a choice in how we show up, and we have a choice in how we speak to ourselves, and how we, you know, there's a difference between having to do something and getting to do something. And I think a lot of that is just around, just feeling grateful for what we do have. So I certainly found that I felt less stressed and pressured afterwards, because life is very short and no one wants to just be stressing all the time. So I think that was a learning. I mean, it's still challenging, and obviously for anyone, I'm sure I'm not the only one that has gone through building a business and grieving at the same time, and it is two things that are quite all consuming, and it is quite hard to navigate them both together, especially as they're also things that not everyone understands. You know, for me, I've lost both my parents, and I'm 35, so most of my friends still have both parents, so they haven't necessarily gone through a significant grief, and so it can feel like no one maybe understands. And it's a similar thing with building a business. You know, obviously other founders understand, but actually, you know, friends that are employees, it's maybe they don't quite understand what you're going through. So kind of having two of those things in parallel. But you know, it's death. We all get there in the end, and I think that's really, it makes you think nothing's truly worth stressing about, because you'll be dead in the end anyway. We all will. I know that's like really sinister, but I think that it has a lightness as well. I don't know if I'm making sense with this.
No, I get it, Pip. It's super, super beautiful. I want to thank you so much for, you know, opening up here and sharing that. You are completely right. You know, there are others who have gone through at least a version of this, or you know, so I think hearing someone else, and you're totally right as well, you know, it's such a unique situation that you're in, being both an entrepreneur, going through the grieving process, both things, I totally get your point, both things are so kind of personal and unique. That is a blocker to, you know, others relating to us. I'm half tempted to, you know, leave the episode there on such a beautiful note, but I will close with the traditional closing question, which is obviously one tragedy which has taught you an unforgettable lesson. Of course, you've just shared a real, you know, tragedy with the sad passing of your dad, but bringing it back, I guess, to the business, I know that there's one particular, you know, lesson that you want to leave our listeners with. So what would you like to share there?
Yes, I would say incredibly careful who you share equity with. We obviously touched on the rigorous process Kate and I went through, but I had a much more difficult experience previously. My advice would be just do your due diligence, whether it's a co-founder, an investor, an advisor, anyone that you're contractually binding yourself to through business. Really make sure you know who they are and be comfortable with that relationship, because it's probably harder than divorce to get out of.
All right, fantastic lesson to leave it with. Pip, thank you so much for coming on the show, and again, especially your particular story. I know it's so heartfelt. You've been so open in today's interview, so I'm really grateful to you.
Of course, thank you so much for having me.
And thank you so much for listening. Really hope you enjoyed this episode. Don't forget to subscribe, and hopefully see you next time.